Mr. President, I thank my colleagues for their courtesy and their patience, and I look forward to this continuing debate as we take on the debt threat that looms over our nation. I thank the Chair and yield the floor.
The Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I commend the Budget Chairman on his contribution to this debate and his contribution to our country, and I enjoyed listening to his remarks and appreciate many of the ideas that he's offered today. I rise to talk about an anniversary, though, today, not my anniversary or his, but the anniversary of Dodd-Frank, which passed a year ago today. And this morning at a press conference, Barney Frank, then chairman of the House Banking Committee, and the Frank N. Dodd-Frank held an extensive press conference and speech before the National Press Club. And in it, he made some comments that are very important, and I wanted to share my agreement and support for some of the things Chairman Frank said. Now, I did not vote for Dodd-Frank when it passed a year ago, but I did, along with Senator Hagan and Senator Landrieu, offer an amendment which was adopted by the Senate and ultimately agreed to by the House in the Conference Committee. It was an amendment known as QRM, Qualifying Residential Mortgage, an amendment to carve out an exemption from risk retention for a well-underwritten mortgage loan. The Dodd-Frank bill, as many in this room will remember, originally called for a total 5% risk retention on every residential mortgage made, which would have eliminated many people from making any residential mortgages at all. In fact, Chairman Frank today, or Ranking Member Frank, in his comments said, well, we had 100% risk retention prior to 1984. Well, he's right. He's right. That's when Savings and Loans made loans, and that's when the federal government insured the others, and Savings and Loans had preferential interest rate treatment, so they could make preferential payments to people to save in their institution versus a bank. But the federal government took away the 1/4% differential that Savings and Loans had, and the banks became competitive with Savings and Loans for short and long-term deposits of savings, and all the savings money flowed to the banks that offered other products. So Savings and Loans went out of business, and when they did, there was no residential mortgage money, at least no conventional money available in America. So what happened? The securitized market began. Freddie and Fannie began to play a significant role in providing conventional residential mortgage money. And until the collapse, which began in 2006 and culminated in 2009, and we still are suffering from today, until that collapse, securitization was a very reasonable and safe way of raising capital for mortgages. What happened in the mortgage collapse was not a failure of equity or skin in the game by the borrower. It was a collapse of underwriting. Mortgage lenders got into loosey-goosey underwriting, subprime credit. They made loans to people that were higher risk in order to price it at a higher rate. And they blurred qualifying requirements to where all of a sudden if you walked in, you fogged up a mirror with your breath, you could probably get a mortgage loan and they could probably securitize it. Dodd-Frank was designed to see to it that didn't happen again, and I commend them for that. But as government often does, sometimes it goes too far when the pendulum swings back the other way. Thus is the dilemma we are in today as the rule being proposed by the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, Comptroller of the Currency, on the QRM rule is going to require, in addition to quality underwriting, a minimum 20% down payment. Now, Mr. President, for years in this country, we have had 90 and 95% conventional financing, or in terms of FHA, 3.5% down payment, and VA, none at all. There have been various varieties of down payments that have been allowed based on the loan and its insurance. But with this rule of requiring risk retention on any loan with a down payment of less than 20%, except for an FHA or VA loan, is going to literally destroy what's left of the residential housing market, because it will extract what is probably 40 to 45, maybe 50% of the current market today. Senator Landrieu and Senator Hagan and myself in QRM proposed that people have a qualifying ratio of debt to income that's sufficient to amortize the debt, a third-party verification they have a job, a credit score that indicates they're willing to pay their payments, an appraisal that indicates the house is worth what they're paying for it, and a down payment with mortgage insurance required if the down payment exceeded or was less than 20%. Today I want to quote from Ranking Member Frank. When talking about risk retention, he said, "I am troubled because there is an assault now on risk retention." Barney Frank adding that even though he believes the 20% requirement in the QRM rule being circulated is too high. When asked further what would be a good down payment, he said at least 4 or 5, something above FHA. I want to commend the ranking member because he is precisely right. Although he, in his original intent with Dodd-Frank, did not want to bifurcate residential qualifying mortgages by having some having risk retention and some not, recognized the importance of doing some of that bifurcation and having some exception to risk retention. They would have realized that anyway if you recognize they exempted Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and FHA from the requirements of Dodd-Frank and left them solely on the conventional market. So I want to thank Congressman Frank today for his comments as it related to QRM and his identifying the down payment requirement currently being circulated is entirely too high. It is entirely too high, and it's very important that we get the final rule, which will be published on August 1st, to have a reasonable down payment of 5% or more rather than 20% or more. 5% or more will ensure their skin in the game. And with the other qualifying and underwriting provisions in QRM, it will ensure that quality residential mortgages are being made. Now, for the President, I'm not one to offer advice often to the President. He's the President. He can do as he wishes. But today in Politico, there's an article about the President is now returning to revisit the residential housing market because he understands employment's not coming back until housing comes back. He understands the American dream is for some people now an American nightmare, and he understands what's been done so far has not been working. Well, I want to suggest to the President that if he thinks what's happening now is a nightmare, you just wait until this QRM rule that's being circulated now actually goes in effect. Without it being changed, if it continue to require a 20% down payment, you will have a further lack of demand in the housing market, which already is almost at least anemic, if not feeble. Because most Americans who want to buy a home can afford 5% or maybe 10% down, but they can't afford 20%. And that's middle America. And if you pull them out of what's already an anemic housing market, you have no housing market at all. So as this Dodd-Frank rule is being circulated in the next 2.5 to 3 weeks before it's finalized, I hope we can all keep up the drumbeat for the regulators to be reasonable in their approach. Understand risk retention is important, but also understand home ownership is important. Understand that we had a collapse that was not down payment related. We have a collapse which was underwriting related. So if you have strong underwriting and a minimal skin in the game, at least of 5%, you have a qualified residential mortgage that does not have to have risk retention, and therefore you'll have enough capital raised in the mortgage markets to fund a housing demand which hopefully is going to continue to grow. In the absence of securitization, in the absence of an exemption for risk retention for a qualified residential mortgage, there will be no housing market in the United States of America. FHA is already under so much stress and duress, it is awful and it's frightful. The Veterans Administration is a privileged loan for those who have served and made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, and they deserve it. Freddie and Fannie are exempted because we've got them in conservatorship. But they're not going to be a source of money for long. Something will have to replace them, a new entity, probably one with securitization. But if the QRM rule being circulated now does in fact go in place as it is written, with a minimal 20% down payment, it will be the last nail in the coffin of the American housing market. The unintended consequence of reaching too far to react to a terrible crisis, which we had, will put the death knell of the housing market squarely on the shoulders of this Congress, this administration, and these regulators who are currently carrying out those rules. So I just want to commend Ranking Member Frank on his comments today, his recognition that the QRM rule being circulated asks too much, recognizing that a 5% or greater down payment is a reasonable approach, and recognizing that underwriting is the important key to see to it that we have a housing market. I commend the gentleman from Massachusetts. I thank him for his adding that comment today to the National Press Club, and I hope the regulators, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Treasury heard it too. If they didn't hear it and they remain silent and they continue with 20%, they will be doing exactly the opposite of what the President of the United States stated he wants to do, and that's bring the housing market back in America. And I yield back.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Alaska.
Before I talk on the budget, I want to commend the Senator from Georgia. As someone who's been in the real estate business for many years, like the Senator from Georgia, you're absolutely right. If homeowners are stuck with a 20% minimum, the odds are it will crush the housing market. I can tell you this personally because I'm helping my mother do her paperwork now for her home. And I will tell you, if she was required to put 20% down, she would not be buying that home today. And we hope to close the home in the next 45 days. We're fortunate that she's able to do that, but 20% would take her right out of the market, unable to buy the home that she wants to retire in. So, Senator from Georgia, thank you for making those comments. I hope more people hear it in the administration, because if they don't hear that, as we know with the housing market, it is a critical component of the ability for us to continue to pull ourselves out of the recession. So thank you for making those comments and noting that. Mr. President, I know Senator Conrad was down here earlier, the chair of the Budget Committee, to talk about the budget, Democratic budget framework. I first want to say thanks to Chairman Conrad. You know, here's someone who's been on the Budget Committee for 25 years, since 1986, been chairman for many of those years. Unbelievable capacity and understanding of the budget and what needs to be done. He understands it. He clearly recognizes that we have to have a balanced approach. For months, yourself, Mr. President, myself, who sit on the Budget Committee, along with the chairman on the Democratic side, have been working to try to figure out how do we craft a balanced approach. How do we ensure that at the end of the day, we recognize that we have to have a budget that continues to help grow our economy, create fairness in the system, and make sure we take the responsibility of creating a more accountable and financially responsible budget, not only for this year, but for the years out, and dealing with a comprehensive approach to dealing with the deficit. This is not an easy task, to say the least, and I can say, standing here, and I know, Mr. President, as a member of the Budget Committee also, none of those meetings were easy in the discussion, if I could say that. Robust debate, robust controversy in some of the issues we talked about, but also a lot of ideas. But what's in front of us? I think no one can match the chairman's approach of how to address an issue like this as he lays out slide after slide the impacts from the macro to the micro of this budget and what it will mean. But it's clear that the budget proposal that he's laid out, the framework, as he calls it, by the Democratic majority of the Budget Committee, is $4 trillion in cuts for deficit reduction, and is achieved in a very fair and balanced way, without putting the burden on the backs of seniors, working families, and small business. This is a balanced approach. The deficit-cutting mechanisms are drawn half from savings and half from revenues. Revenues mean closing loopholes. His photo there, which, as we sit here and present to the President our positions, it's hard for people, I know, in the balconies to see the photo, but it's amazing, the five-story building. It's not a very attractive building. It's just a small little five-story building in a tax haven that grants thousands and thousands of business a shelter from their fair share of paying their taxes. The idea of this revenue component of the proposal we've put forward is closing loopholes, closing down tax avoidance schemes that rely on abusive tax shelters. And yes, cutting tax subsidies, ending the practice of giving the wealthiest of the wealthy tax subsidies so they simply do not need. It really is about just promoting fairness. And guess what? As we dealt with this budget, it's a $4 trillion reduction, a number that the bipartisan commission hit as their target, one we hear out there now in the press a lot, but one that we felt was a reasonable approach. It's more than the House budget that was proposed. The House budget included savings only on the spending side and actually worsened the outlook on the revenue side, and we simply do not believe that's good enough. The budget is about fairness, about ensuring that we have a system that's balanced, but also investing in the right areas so we have long-term and continued growth. We do not give more tax breaks to corporations and the rich and then put the burden on the backs of seniors, poor kids, working families, disabled. It is unacceptable to put the burden on our most vulnerable population. The budget is truly a moral document. It defines where we're going to go, what we're going to do, and how we're going to look in the next 10 or 20 years as a country. I know this when I was mayor of Anchorage In 2003, when I got elected, I had a budget around $215 million with about a $33 million hole in it. Pretty significant in sense of proportions. But we had to deal with spending and reducing it. We had to create a fairness in the revenue, but we also had to invest. But we also knew the document and the work we were doing on the budget would define where our community goes. Not just in the year that we're doing it, but in the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And I was very pleased. I know when I got elected to the Senate, it was, I think, Business Week and others that rated the city that I was mayor of, Anchorage, as probably the most likely city in the country to recover from the recession the fastest. Matter of fact, Forbes has listed it not only last year but this year as the place, I think it's number 3 this year, as the city of job growth. Because it was a foundation we laid. We had to make some tough decisions, and I remember it as mayor. They're no fun. I know the role of the presiding officer in his role in the county that he represented. They're tough decisions we have to make, but you have to make them. I can still remember one headline that, as we were trying to figure out what to do with our library system that wasn't running as well as it could. So I remember this headline to this day, and it was, "Begich lays off 21 librarians." Not a very good headline, to say the least. But what did we do? We re-examined it, reinvested, increased our partnerships with the private sector. Today, the library system is more robust than ever before. New branch libraries serving more kids than ever before. Better facilities, new equipment, new technology. It's more robust than it's seen in decades because we had to make some tough decisions for the long term. That's where we are today, especially after the disappointing news we had this last week with regards to the job market. When economists thought we were going to have 120,000 new jobs, we ended up with just 18,000. Unemployment rising to 9.2%. As I said, this plan protects critical investment that will help us build the future of our economy here. It invests, as mentioned by Chairman of the Budget Committee, Chairman Conrad, education, energy, which is, of course, for my state, critical. Infrastructure, core infrastructure that, again, I use my experience as mayor. We built more roads than all the mayors combined in the last 20 years in my short time as mayor of Anchorage. We built more vertical construction, fire stations, convention center, museum, other facilities that helped. Water, sewer, power, new generation of gas turbines, all that because when you build that infrastructure, the private sector will attach to it, will be attracted to it, and will build off of that. So this budget that's, again, presented by the majority on the Budget Committee keeps our investments in education, energy, infrastructure, which in turn will ensure that we continue to move back into the realm of being more competitive on a worldwide market. Mr. President, also, all of you have heard the budget proposal lays out some ideas on tax reform. Not just a little bit here and a little bit there, but fairly significant. When you talk about our corporate rate in this budget proposal by the majority in the Budget Committee, it brings it down to about 29%. It's not where I'd like it, but it's better than where it's at today. It gets us more competitive on the world market. A group of us also have introduced a piece of legislation in advance of this budget proposal. It was the Wyden, Coates, and Begich Bipartisan Tax Fairness Simplification Act. The legislation provides real tax reform for a very outdated system. It plays off of exactly what the majority laid out. A budget proposal that talks about tax reform to create certainty for our business community for long-term investments, and we take it to one more step. Not only do we look at the corporate component, we look at the individuals. Can you imagine this, Mr. President, Presiding Officer? As an individual right now, we deal with 6 different rate structures. If we could reduce it to 3, which our bill does, and you could do your tax return on one page. Can you imagine the amount of time, effort, money individuals will save? So we take the budget proposal that the committee that I sit on, the presiding officer sits on, and we take it one step further. Not only do we focus on stability and certainty for the business community, which is critical for the long-term investments they need to make to ensure all those trillions they have literally locked up in their cash accounts because they're not sure where we're headed as a country. We create the certainty, but then we also ensure that the individual has a compressed rate, a fairer system, and simplified, which we think is an important part. Tax reform is an integral part of the conversation in deficit reduction. I'm pleased that Conrad's proposal also provides some of the same tax reform principles as I mentioned. As I mentioned, it not only deals with the rate structure, but as he detailed very aggressively, closing shelters, loopholes, and not just for one industry over another industry, which has been some of the debate. It's a fairness of all. We look at it all because we want everyone to be treated fairly. Now let me talk about a couple more pieces in the budget, the majority's budget of the Budget Committee. Again, Chairman Conrad went through it in great detail, but I want to put it in and emphasize this point some more. The AMT, the middle-class tax cuts. And what does this mean? What does this mean for the average person out there? Right now, 4.3 million taxpayers are affected by the AMT, which is a small little tax provision that many years ago was set in place to really get the richest of the richest of the richest. But it was never indexed, never inflation adjusted, so it's grown and grown. So this 4.3 million taxpayers we have today, if we don't fix this tax problem, it will increase to 31 million people will have additional taxes to pay. So what are we doing? We're putting what we call the AMT patch to fix this problem. So 30-plus million people will not have this additional tax burden. We think it's right. We think it's the right approach, and it goes to the people who need it the most. In addition, this framework, again, that was laid out today, for single and couples, singles 500,000 and couples 1 million and more, will not receive the tax relief as everyone below them will receive. The tax relief will be focused on families who earn $1 million or less. Why is that important? Because not only are they families, but almost 98% of all businesses, small businesses, earn $1 million or less net income, pre-tax. So you protect the small businesses that are the backbone of this country, the backbone of my state. I can tell you this as a small business person. You know this as someone who worked in a small business that grew to a larger business. It's the backbone. It's what makes the difference between the hiring of every single day. When people see their revenue stream starts to increase, they hire small business, hire immediately. They need those employees. But this proposal is not only for the individual and then also the larger corporation bringing in that corporate rate, but it protects almost all the small businesses in this country and, of course, being very biased in my state. What does that mean? That means when you calculate it all in real dollars, and you heard the numbers, when you think about the tax reductions, the tax savings for middle-class Americans, small business, is well over $1 trillion between the AMT and preserving the tax relief for families under $1 million. It's significant. That is money that small businesses will reinvest into their businesses, employing other small businesses to do the work. It is families that will have more disposable income to put into the economy, which of course means more purchases from businesses, which means more hiring, and just has a constant ripple effect. It's about people who will really actually put the money. When you talk to businesses and business owners, and I spend a lot of time with them as a small business person and a senator now, meeting with business folks on a regular basis, it's over and over again they tell me, put the money in the hands of the consumer, then the consumers will spend that money, improve the economy, because as they spend money, we will add more employees, buy more product, goes on and on and on. So there is a difference between what we're trying to do in the sense of the value of who receives the benefit of a comprehensive budget proposal, a budget proposal that the majority in the Budget Committee has worked on for the last 2-3 months at least, and before that, trying to figure out the right approach. It is a balanced approach. It focuses, as I said, on dealing with budget reductions, accountability, ensuring that where there is waste, we go after it aggressively, where people are taking advantage of the system at the cost of the everyday person, we go after that. But we don't forget that we have to invest in the core issues of education, energy, and infrastructure, so we continue to grow this economy. If we don't have a balanced approach in this process, and I know on the other side they'll argue over and over again that first let's do spending and then we'll deal with the other things. You have to do it all together. I'm telling you this as a person who ran a city for almost 6 years, ran businesses for many years. You can't do it on one piece of the equation. It's a three-prong attack. You know, some of the folks I know around here after years of service have gotten a little amnesia of how it all occurred. We can sit here and blame individuals, blame certain presidents, certain majorities, but we are where we are, and we have to deal with this. And it's not going to be fun. It will be uncomfortable. It will make us have to dig deep into what's the right thing to do for the long-term health of this country and what we need to do to ensure that America becomes what it used to be, a stronger country economically than it is today, where we are the lead when it comes to innovation. We are the lead when it comes to developing new technologies to lead this world in its economic growth. But we can't do it in this process of, I'm only going to do one thing and only one thing only. That doesn't work. It's going to be an approach that is broad sweeping. But we're not going to forget in this process that we're not going to throw people overboard that have helped build this country. When you think of our seniors who spent a generation building our country to where it is, ensuring that people like myself, the presiding officers and others have an incredible opportunity, and thinking about where they need to be, this budget plan keeps Social Security off the table. We recognize there are issues that we have to deal with it in its sustainability, and we recognize that. But it is not a driver. It has not contributed one penny to this deficit. We need to treat the Social Security in a way that ensures sustainability in long term, and there are simple solutions to that that I know we can get to. We also ensure that Medicare is taken care of, that benefits are not reduced. We also, as the chairman said so eloquently earlier, our veterans who serve now in Iraq and Afghanistan and all around the world and have served before, they're protected. Veterans who we owe a great deal to. That in some cases, before I got here, I know there was a lot of debate, and the Veterans Committee, which I sit on, we've been working very hard to ensure they have the benefits they deserve. We need to make sure we fund them. When we send them to war, and then they become veterans after their service, we have an obligation that should not be sliced and diced because we want to make political statements on a budget-cutting process. They need to be protected. As I said, this budget does many things. It's a fair approach. It may not be the perfect in all sense. I can tell you there's things that I don't like in it that are going to impact groups that are concerned about how we approach this, but we're all in this together. We need to make the approach the right way. But those that are so hardened now that say it's only going to be about spending cuts, which let me make it very clear. I think the Budget Committee, the majority on the Budget Committee, the chairman has made it very clear, we're not afraid of dealing with budget cuts. We have done that. $2 trillion of budget cuts. $2 trillion, not billion, trillion. I have to get used to that when we're here in the Senate. Not B's and not M's, they're T's. $2 trillion of budget cuts. But we also balance it with getting rid of loopholes, tax shelters in a fair, balanced way so everyone pays their fair share. But we also make sure we invest in the future. Because if we're short-sighted around this place, we will pay for it next year and the year after that and the year after that. So this is truly, I think, a right approach that goes after ensuring that the middle class are not the people carrying the burden, as they've been doing for the last several years, especially in the last 2 years, clearly, and that everyone participates, but we also make sure the investment is done the right way. I know the chairman laid out in great detail all that's in the framework. We think it's an important piece to lay down that Democrats have been working every hour, every day, even when we're back in our home states trying to talk to constituents. We're talking about the budget. I know the presiding officer tells me stories every night he heads home, and you meet with constituents to try to figure out what the right approach is here. And we bring all that information right here in this body. We did it in the majority in the Budget Committee. I know I put up a website request to Alaskans to tell me what they want to cut, or what do they want to save, or what do they want to have as revenues. And like good Alaskans, they were not bashful. They were very adamant about what they wanted and what they didn't want, and where we should cut or where we shouldn't cut. I've taken all that in, and I've used that as part of my debate and discussion with the majority of the Budget Committee to figure out what the right approach is. I think this is the right approach. I think some might call it a big deal. You know, in the U.S. Senate, this is the big deal. We're in the big place. This is where big deals happen. This is where it all has to happen, because it's where we drive the economy in the sense of our certainty and our policies. If we can't have a strong deficit reduction budget, we're not going to create the certainty that the business community needs to invest, which will in turn employ more people and create a better economy for us here, and obviously will have an impact around the world. Mr. President, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, again commending the chairman who was here earlier for all his work. It's a tough call. I will end on this comment. That story I told you about the librarians and the headline I had to have, that was in my first 6 months of office when I was mayor. 2.5 years later, I won re-election with one of the largest margins in the city's history. So I would say this to anybody who's trying to figure out, are they going to win their primary, win their general election? Put that all aside. That's what I did when I was mayor and had to make some tough calls. Did I know if I would win re-election or not? I don't know. But I knew I had to do the right thing because it was the city I lived in. It was the state that I grew up in. And it was important for us to make the right decision, which at the end of the day is usually the right political decision. That's what this body has to do. And it's not fun because people face primaries, they face general elections, some will win, some will lose. But if we're true public servants, truly it doesn't matter if we're sitting in this room or sitting outside there, we're always public servants. So we have to do what's right, and do what's right in this critical time for this country and really in the global perspective. Because if we don't do a right deficit plan, it will ripple through this country and it will ripple through this world in the wrong direction. So, again, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the chance to say a few words. But also, I implore my colleagues on the other side to think about today's opportunities for the generations in the future and not about today's elections. And I mean on both sides of the aisle. It's about the moment of what we will do for this country. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak till I finish my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in recent days I've spoken several times on the matter of tax expenditures. I'm going to address this subject again today, and it is a timely topic. Everyone is talking about our out-of-control deficits and debt. There are divergent opinions on how best to deal with our nation's increasingly perilous fiscal situation. But there's one thing that everyone seems to agree on. Both the deficits and the debt are unsustainable. If we keep going down this fiscal path, the U.S. will face a crisis similar to that in Greece, and sooner rather than later. The numbers could not be clearer. Federal spending as a share of our economy is trending at a pace 15 to 20% greater than its historical average of 20.6% of GDP. If we leave in place this year's level of taxation, including the marginal rate relief of the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts, and patch the alternative minimum tax, or AMT, the federal tax take will equal or exceed its historic share of the economy. Now, liberals suggest that the deficit and debt can only be resolved with a significant tax increase. This is either deliberately misleading or sadly delusional. They are either selling snake oil to the American people or they refuse to come to grips with reality. But sticking their heads in the sand is not an option here. As you can see, federal taxes and spending as a percentage of GDP, the red line happens to be the spending line. And as you can see, we're way up here in the Obama 2012 budget. The blue line happens to be the average between 1960 and 2009. And as you can see, it's way down here. Our spending is out of control. The markets and the American people understand the nature of our crisis. Non-defense discretionary spending is at historic levels, and our entitlement programs are headed for bankruptcy. When former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi responded to the utter failure of President Obama and congressional Democrats to come up with a Medicare reform plan, she responded, quote, "We have a plan, it's called Medicare," unquote. That attitude is a recipe for bankrupting the nation, a bankruptcy that will take our seniors down with it. The left might prefer to ignore reality, but here's the undeniable truth. Our nation faces a spending crisis that tax increases cannot fix. And I wish that the media would get this. They are so enamored with the idea of a grand bargain on deficit reduction, a little spending reduction here, a little tax increase there, that they miss a fundamental point. The problem is spending, as you can easily see by this red line. It's way out of whack. And going back to the dry well of raising taxes on the rich is not going to work. The fact that Democrats in the Senate have not put forward a budget in over 800 days is neglecting one of the core constitutional responsibilities, and it's all the evidence we need that they are afraid of the bill coming due on all of their spending. They understand that their hard-left base will not accept structural changes to our biggest spending programs under any circumstances. But they also understand that the American people will not stomach for a minute the tax increases that will be necessary in the absence of such reforms. This is a difficult position to be in, so rather than deal with the facts, they traffic in obfuscation. This morning I heard the ranking Democratic member on the House Budget Committee following the President's lead and suggesting that removing some tax breaks for energy companies would fix our deficit crisis. Getting rid of those tax breaks would raise $21 billion over the next 10 years. Yet this fiscal year alone, in 2011, we will have a projected budget deficit of about $1.5 to $1.6 trillion. So where's the rest of the money going to come from? Last week I came under fire for stating what I thought to be a relatively non-controversial fact. Here's what I said. In 2009, 51% of Americans had zero or negative income tax liability. Now here's what that means. In 2009, only 49%, a minority of all households in this country, 49% of tax units shouldered 100% of the nation's tax burden. And 51% of the tax units, a majority of all tax units in this country, either owed nothing to the IRS or, better yet, got money back from the IRS in excess of their tax liability. 23 million of them got refundable tax credits, much more than they pay in employment taxes, which are Social Security. And by the way, as they pay into Social Security, they're only paying a third of what they'll ultimately draw out, according to the actuaries. But they're not paying income taxes. Now, this should be no less controversial than saying the sun rises in the east. This is not conjecture. It is a demonstrable fact, yet it apparently touched a nerve, because last week, after raising this issue on the Senate floor, MSNBC and the liberal blogosphere, presumably armed with the talking points from the Senate Democratic War Room, went ballistic, suggesting that I wanted to balance the budget by raising taxes on the poor. I'm not surprised, but this completely misses my point. And the point is this. No matter what these Democrats tell you, the wealthy and middle class are already shouldering around 100% of the nation's tax burden, and 51% pay absolutely nothing in income taxes. Furthermore, because of this perverse distribution of federal income taxes, there is no way to fix our deficit hole and start paying down the debt by increasing taxes only on the so-called rich. Here's the bottom line. All of the left's talk about taxes on the rich and closing loopholes and going after corporate tax breaks is meant to divert attention away from the sad fact that the president's out-of-control spending puts Democrats in a position of having to raise taxes big time on the middle class if they are going to balance the budget without structural reforms to our largest spending programs. Tax increases on the wealthy will not get our nation to fiscal balance. Even if we let the Bush tax breaks expire for the top income bracket, the total amount raised over 10 years would be $615 billion. That's over 10 years. Yet our deficit this year alone is $1.5 to $1.6 trillion. And this is why the issue of tax expenditures is critical. Now, just so everybody knows, I made it pretty clear, I thought, in my last remarks, that I don't want to tax the truly poor, those who would help themselves if they could. I don't want to tax them. But you can't tell me that 51% of all households are the truly poor. And I really don't want to tax them either, to be honest with you. But it's apparent that we're going to have to find a better way of broadening the base of the tax system. Now, Democrats talk about tax expenditures as though they were the holy grail of deficit reduction. Just close these loopholes and happy days are here again. Now, the public is being misled in this type of debate, but don't take my word for it. Today, the Associated Press had a story with the following line, spin meter, Obama, Dems, skirt issue on tax hikes. And this is what the body of the article has to say, quote, proposals under consideration include raising taxes on small business owners and potentially low and middle income families. You won't hear about that from Obama. Instead, the president focuses on the very rich and speaks euphemistically. Here are a few of the phrases the president has used of late to talk about what amounts to raising taxes for some. What we need to do is to have a balanced approach where everything is on the table. He goes on to say we need to take on spending in the tax code. The tax cuts I'm proposing we get rid of are tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, tax breaks for oil companies and hedge fund managers and corporate jet owners. You can't reduce the deficit to the levels that it needs to be reduced without having some revenue in the mix, unquote. All of those are quotes by the president. They're doing their best to hide their intentions, but the writing is on the wall. Democrats are angling for historic tax increases on the middle class, and the way that they would like to accomplish this is by reducing or eliminating tax expenditures. Now, cutting back tax expenditures is a convenient way for Democrats to tax middle-class tax-paying families without having to say they are raising their tax rates. As I noted last week, this is what we were talking about when Democrats discuss tax expenditures. They are talking about your pension. They are talking about your Medicare. They are talking about your ability to purchase a home or save for retirement or give to your church or put away money for your children's education. This is exactly what we are talking about. That is where the money is. It is not in bonus depreciation for corporate jets, and it is not in tax benefits for energy companies. When Democrats talk about tax expenditures and tax loopholes as a way to bring down the deficit and debt, they are putting a bullseye on the backs of middle-class American families. We heard a lot this morning about Republicans walking away from the president's grand bargain on deficit reduction. Well, I know that the people of Utah applaud Speaker Boehner for not signing on to this bogus deal. This morning, the president's allies in the media were out asking why Republicans walked away from this deal. With the president willing to put entitlement spending on the table, why aren't Republicans willing to put taxes on the table? First, it is worth noting that the president and his Democratic allies steadfastly refuse any structural changes to entitlement spending. And second, for Democrats, putting taxes on the table and tax expenditures means tax increases on the middle class. And that is a non-starter. This issue of tax expenditures is confusing and demands greater clarity. As ranking member of the Finance Committee, it is my responsibility to correct the record on what the curtailment or elimination of tax expenditures would really mean for taxpayers and families. If you listen to my friends on the other side of the aisle, you would think tax expenditures are, quote, spending through the tax code, unquote. You would think they are mostly loopholes in the tax law designed by and for special interests like ethanol blenders. Another mantra you will hear too often uncritically reviewed by many in the media is that tax expenditures disproportionately benefit wealthy taxpayers. A few days ago, I talked about what tax expenditures are and what tax expenditures are not. They are not spending. You can find the text of that speech from July 6th on the Finance Committee website. And they are not, in the main, loopholes for special interests. Just the other day, I talked about the major features of family financial planning that would be upended if tax expenditures were curtailed. I referred to employee pension plans like 401k accounts. I also mentioned charitable gifts and home ownership interest deduction. If my friends on the other side are successful in cutting back tax expenditures, American families, workers, and investors can expect the cost of all these activities to rise. If the cost rises as a nation, we will be poorer because we will have less retirement savings, fewer charitable contributions, and more expensive home ownership. You can find the text of that speech from last Thursday on the committee website as well. Today I'm going to consider the oft-repeated line that tax expenditures disproportionately benefit the wealthy taxpayers. For purposes of this discussion only, I'll adopt the President's definition of rich. That is, singles with adjusted gross incomes over $200,000 per year and married couples with incomes over $250,000 per year. I want to be clear that I do not lump all of these folks in the Bill Gates Jr., LeBron James, Warren Buffett, or Gilligan's Island's resident millionaire, Thurston Howell III. Now here's Thurston, good old Thurston. He was the millionaire in Gilligan's Island. I'm using the President's definition of rich because most of my friends on the other side use it. They also claim tax expenditures reside disproportionately with rich taxpayers. The Democrats' rhetoric on expenditures does not jibe with the reality of our tax code. The data is clear. Tax expenditures tend to skew towards taxpayers below the President's definition of the rich. If my friends on the other side examine the data, they will find that their assertion about who benefits from tax expenditures does not square with the facts. They will find that their assertion that tax expenditures disproportionately benefit the wealthy falls flat on its face. In much of the coverage of tax expenditures, it has been taken as an article of faith that they disproportionately benefit wealthy taxpayers. Similar assertions have come from the White House and congressional Democrats. The one exception is my friend, the ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee, Sander Levin. Congressman Levin has cautioned against treating tax expenditures as rich persons' tax benefits, and his position is well-founded. The source for this assertion that tax expenditures are tax benefits to the rich is a Tax Notes article dated May 3, 2011. I ask unanimous consent to insert it in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Now, the article is written by Roberton Williams of the Tax Policy Center, or TPC. TPC is a tax policy think tank that is the product of two center-left think tanks. The article presents conclusions from a TPC distribution analysis of tax expenditures. The analysis concludes that about two-thirds of tax expenditures benefit the top quintile of households in the study. Viewers on C-SPAN may wonder what a quintile is. It refers to a fifth of a given population. The TPC analysis is therefore measuring the top fifth of the population. According to that study, where does the top fifth of the population begin? It begins at $123,000 of household income. It should be noted that household income is a bit broader than the adjusted gross income, which is the basis of the President's definition. According to TPC, That top quintile earns 55% of income and shoulders a huge amount of the federal tax burden. They say it is 67%. Now, perhaps not too surprisingly, TPC finds that tax expenditures for the top quintile approximate that top fifth's share of the tax burden. With the exception of the refundable credit tax expenditures, a taxpayer has to pay income tax to benefit from a tax deduction, credit, or exclusion. Those asserting that tax expenditures are mainly wealthy taxpayer benefits are principally relying on TPC's distribution analysis. If confronted with the TPC data, it seems to me they have four choices. Their first choice would be to revise downward the income basis of their definition of rich. They could say we really did not mean families at $250,000 of income. We meant families of $123,000 of income. That would be similar to the adjustment made for Obamacare. Joint tax distribution tables for Obamacare showed that for every family below $200,000 that received an exchange credit, 4 families paid higher taxes. For every middle-class family that receives a premium subsidy, 5 pay higher taxes. That's just a fact. I guess I said 5, it really would be 4 would pay higher taxes. A second choice would be to revise the proportion of tax expenditures so that the tax expenditure dollar amount reflects the benefits attributable to taxpayers defined by the President as rich. The President's rich taxpayer definition is the top 3 to 5% of taxpayers. It means the group of taxpayers is roughly 25 to 33% of the size of the group in the TPC analysis. Put another way, the TPC population of, quote, rich, unquote, taxpayers is 3 to 4 times the size of the group the President and my friends on the other side define as rich. If a consistent definition of the rich were used, the dollar amounts of tax expenditures in play would be considerably lower. Since the goal of the group pushing the cutback of tax expenditures is to relieve spending constituencies of the pressure of curtailing spending, my guess is they will not choose to reduce the tax expenditure kitty. The third choice would be to simply curtail or eliminate tax expenditures for higher income taxpayers. This, of course, could largely eliminate the preferential rates for capital gains and dividends. Let's take another look at this because it shows a big share of the capital gain tax expenditure goes to the top fifth. Now, it looks like about 95% of tax expenditure accrues in the top fifth. Well, you'll see that about 50% of it accrues to the top 1/10 of 1%. Do we think it would make sense in the current economic climate to double or triple the tax hit on investment? At one point, at least the President's answer was no. In August 2009, the President was asked by a resident of Indiana, quote, explain how raising taxes on anyone during a deep recession is going to help with the economy, unquote. Here was the President's response, quote, normally you don't raise taxes in a recession, which is why we haven't and why we've instead cut taxes. You don't raise taxes in a recession. We haven't raised taxes in a recession, unquote. So what is their fourth choice? Their fourth choice would be coming clean with the American people. Under this option, they would admit that tax expenditures disproportionately go to families who are not rich under the President's own definition. They would acknowledge that cutting back tax expenditures as part of a deficit reduction exercise would hit the middle class and betray the President's promise not to raise taxes on middle-class families. As you can see, the proponents of these tax increases are in political quicksand, and there is additional evidence that they are sinking as they struggle against the facts. I would ask my friends on the other side to take a look at the joint tax distribution tables on many of the major tax expenditure categories. Joint Tax publishes these tables every year. They are available on the Joint Tax website. Now, I have a chart that summarizes the percentages of tax expenditures that go to taxpayers under $200,000. I'll have to bring that with me the next time. That's the breakpoint that Joint Tax uses, the percentage of tax expenditures that go to taxpayers under $200,000. It closely squares with the definition of rich used by the President and his liberal allies. Anybody above $200,000 is rich under my Democratic friend's definition. Anybody under $200,000 is not rich. You can find this data in the tax expenditures pamphlet published annually by the nonpartisan Joint Tax staff. Now, I would like to talk about the tax expenditures the Joint Tax distributes by income. I have listed them in order, from the largest in dollar volume down to the lowest in dollar volume. The first one is well known to tens of millions of our constituents. It is the mortgage interest deduction. If a taxpayer saves up a down payment and borrows for a home, they can take the interest paid on the mortgage as an itemized deduction. That means that 30% of the benefit of mortgage interest tax expenditure goes to taxpayers over $200,000. Taxpayers with income below $200,000 receive 70% of the benefit of the mortgage interest deduction. Now, how do we measure whether the mortgage interest deduction disproportionately benefits taxpayers over $200,000? Well, there is a line in the taxpayers' approach to this in bold letters, and it reads, quote, compare total federal tax burden. That is the baseline of how much tax is shouldered by the group of taxpayers above and below $200,000. Now, we have a very progressive tax system. Taxpayers earning more than $200,000 shoulder 64% of the tax burden. Taxpayers earning less than $200,000 shoulder 36% of the tax burden. Taxpayers earning less than $200,000 receive 70% of the mortgage interest deduction while shouldering 36% of the tax burden. Now, who benefits from these tax expenditures? We're going to get into that. That means by a ratio of almost 2 to 1, taxpayers under $200,000 benefit from the mortgage interest deduction. And since $200,000 basically fits the definition of rich used by my friends on the other side of the aisle, we can see that other taxpayers, the non-rich or middle-income group, disproportionately benefit from the mortgage interest deduction. Now, let me talk about another tax expenditure. I'm referring to the Earned Income Credit, or EIC. It is a refundable credit. That means taxpayers receive it whether they pay income tax or not. That is why the credit is basically scored as spending by the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and Joint Tax. There's a bit of irony about this tax expenditure. Because it's refundable, it is more popular with my friends on the other side than other tax expenditures. And that is because those other tax expenditures go to taxpayers who actually pay more tax, or actually pay income tax, excuse me. The refundable credit is popular with my friends on the other side because it is a robust income redistribution mechanism. President Obama, in his famous exchange with Joe the Plumber, captured the economic theory supporting this policy when he said we need to, quote, spread the wealth around, unquote. Here's the irony. My friends on the other side derisively describe all tax expenditures as, quote, spending through the tax code, unquote. Yet the tax expenditures they most support are the refundable ones, like the Earned Income Credit. It should come as little surprise that the left's favorite tax expenditure is the one that is scored as spending by congressional scorekeepers. Because the Earned Income Credit tax expenditure is refundable, you shouldn't be surprised to find that so-called rich taxpayers do not benefit from it. The chart confirms this point. The third tax expenditure is the current $1,000 right here, the $1,000 per child tax credit. It is by definition limited to lower and middle income taxpayers. We should not be surprised to find that none of it goes to higher income taxpayers, and the chart confirms this point. 0 to taxpayers over $200,000, 100% to taxpayers under $200,000. Let's take a look at state and local taxes. It is the fourth one on here. The chart shows that 50% of the broad-based deduction goes to middle-income families. Number 5 on this list is a tax benefit near and dear to many of my fellow Utah families. It is the itemized deduction for charitable contributions or donations. Of all the tax expenditures listed on this chart, this big chart right here, this one, charitable itemized deductions, distributes in the highest proportion to taxpayers above $200,000 in income. The chart says 55% right here. 45% of those under $200,000. But keep in mind, overall taxpayers with income over $200,000 bear 64% of the tax burden. Now, this means proportionally the charitable deduction benefits taxpayers under the $200,000 level more than taxpayers above the $200,000 level. Now, let's take a look at number 6 on this chart. It is the tax-free portion of Social Security benefits right there. Anyone advocating a cutback on tax expenditures is advocating a cutback on the after-tax Social Security benefits for a big chunk of the senior population. And guess what? We're not talking about wealthy seniors. According to this chart, 2% of that favorable tax treatment of Social Security goes to seniors with incomes over $200,000. My guess is that few of the seniors benefited from this policy own yachts or regularly fly corporate jets. Number 7 is the itemized deduction for real property taxes. Right now, their constituents take the edge off that. Heavy local tax hit with the itemized deduction. If many of my friends on the other side have their way and hack away or eliminate tax expenditures without also cutting their constituents' federal tax rate, guess what happens? In the case of local property taxes, the net effect will be to raise the property tax by as much as 35%. Some of my friends may suggest that only those with villas are taking the property tax deduction. This chart says otherwise. It says 80% of real property tax benefits go to taxpayers under $200,000. Now, how about number 9 on the list? Number 9 on the list is the itemized deduction for medical expenses. Obamacare cut back on that one, but if my friends on the other side reduce or eliminate side tax expenditures to avoid dealing with out-of-control government spending, this deduction will be cut back even more. The chart shows on these medical itemized deductions that 89% of this tax benefit goes to taxpayers earning less than $200,000. Number 10 is the dependent child care credit. This is a modest tax credit that working moms and dads can tap. Like the child tax credit, it mainly is used by middle-income families. The chart confirms it. It indicates that 96% of the benefits of this credit go to families earning less than $200,000. Now, the final item on the list is the student loan interest deduction right here. This tax benefit is income limited. Not surprisingly, all of the benefit goes to taxpayers earning less than $200,000, 100% of the benefit. Now, I don't think a lot of the recent college graduates using this deduction are in the market for a yacht. But if you listen to my friends on the other side, you would think because this benefit is labeled a tax expenditure, those who benefit from it have a schooner docked in the local harbor. Now, Mr. President, I'm not saying that only middle-income families benefit from tax expenditures. Wealthy taxpayers benefit from lower capital gains and dividend rates. And let me refer to this, the 10 largest tax expenditures for the period from 2010 to 2014. But the lion's share of tax expenditures goes to that part of the middle class that is already shouldering much of the nation's tax burden. Most of the tax expenditures are either income limited or of limited value to wealthy taxpayers. Likewise, low-income families don't pay income taxes. They receive tax expenditures that are designed for the non-tax-paying population. So who's left? The answer is the taxpayers who are not rich by the President's own definition. The answer is middle-class families. On our side, the reaction to all these choices would be simple. Many on our side, including the Ways and Means Committee Chairman Camp, have put it this way. Keep your hands off tax increases, including cutbacks in tax expenditures for deficit reduction. Reserve those tax expenditures for tax reform. In that way, the taxpayers receive a benefit, lower rates in exchange for a broader base. That broader base would include reform of tax expenditures if Chairman Camp and I have our ways. Any other approach is just another tax increase. And they'll just spend every dime of it on this other side. The President this morning gave another press conference. He asked what the holdup was in arriving at a deficit reduction compromise. The answer seems pretty obvious. Contrary to the President's vague assertions, the left-wing base that he is depending on for his re-election refuses any meaningful structural reforms to the spending programs that are currently bankrupting our country. That means that the only serious deficit reduction option available to Democrats is massive tax increases on the middle class. Democrats won't acknowledge the inevitable tax increases that their agenda assumes, and Republicans won't give the President any cover in his drive to, quote, spread the wealth around, unquote. That is what is holding up this process. Now, let me offer a suggestion. Instead of berating Republicans for not signing on to historic and economic crushing tax increases when unemployment is at 9.2%, maybe the President should take his own party to the woodshed. Maybe he should ask the liberals in his party who refuse any meaningful structural reforms to entitlements to get serious. Maybe he could go on television and explain to the American people that we have over $60 trillion in liabilities and the tax increases are not going to bring that into balance. Instead, the President and his party sit around and spread the myth that simply getting rid of tax expenditures and loopholes, and they certainly aren't loopholes, the ones I've been talking about, will fix our deficits and debt. We have two reasons to worry about that wrong-headed approach. One, to the extent deficit reduction energies are diverted to cutting back tax expenditures, pressure is taken off, the root cause of the deficit and debt problem. That is, pressure that should be brought to bear on out-of-control spending programs is released. Two, the productive sectors of the economy, workers, small business owners, and investors, are burdened with yet more federal taxes. For many reasons, cutbacks in tax expenditures are a deficit reduction dog that won't hunt. Now, if you look at all individual tax expenditures, you can see these are the 10 highest tax expenditures by percentage. But let me go back to the preceding chart. If you look at all these tax expenditures, mortgage interest itemized deduction, 70% of people under $200,000. Earned income tax credit, 100%. Child tax credit, 100%. State and local taxes other than real property, 50%. Charitable itemized deductions, 45%. Yeah, the rich have 55% by their definition. Social Security benefits, 98%. Real property tax itemized deduction, 80%. Education credit, 100%. Medical itemized deductions, 89%. Dependent child care credit, 96%. Student loan interest, 100%. Now, look, my point is we've got to come up with a better tax code. I am dedicated to changing this awful tax code that we have that is too complicated, too large, too expensive, doesn't do the job, and is just a bunch of muttering around and puttering around by members of Congress. And simplifying that code so everybody knows which end is up. On tax expenditures, I'm going to be happy to look at tax expenditures, but they should be reserved until we do real tax reform. And if you have to give up some of these expenditures, then there better be appropriate reductions to account for that. And we've got to do it by flattening out that tax system that we all know is just completely out of control and completely difficult to comply with. As a matter of fact, I don't know of anybody on the Senate Finance Committee who fills out their own tax reforms, or tax forms, rather. I don't think most of us could do it, because if you've got 10 different tax preparers on a semi-complicated tax return, you'd probably have 10 different approaches to it. Now, that shows a pathetic system that is wrecking our country. And just to make it clear, when the President took over, the bottom 40% of all households did not pay income taxes. Yes, they paid payroll taxes, but 23 million of them got refundable tax credits, much more than they paid in payroll taxes. Keep in mind, I don't believe we should tax the truly poor. But now that's up to 51% in just a little over 2 years under this administration of people who don't pay any income taxes. Are they all truly poor? I don't know. All I know is it doesn't sound right that the majority of people, the majority of tax units in this country do not pay income taxes, and the minority has to carry the whole burden. Now, if they're truly poor, I understand, and I'd be the last one to tax them, and I think I have a 35-year record here of being fair to the poor and fair to families, and above all, fair to children. My name's on an awful lot of important bills around here, and I've led the fight on a lot of bills that help people in distress. So you can imagine how aggrieved I felt when one of our great television stations was distorting one sentence, seemed to me one sentence, out of a 30-minute set of remarks on the floor that made it very clear that I don't want to tax the truly poor. But surely we've got to have everybody participate, and I actually think everybody ought to participate, even if it's only $1. We ought to all have some skin in the game. We ought to all help save this country. And we can't do it without the middle class. And the middle class isn't just the top 49% of all wage earners. And this is an important issue. And it's one that we have to resolve, and we have to resolve it fairly. And we have to resolve it in a way that is meaningful and in a way that will help save our country, too. And I think I've more than made the case that you can't just pile it all on the so-called 3 to 5% of the so-called rich, which includes 800,000 small businesses, where 70% of all jobs are created, and everybody knows that's true. And every time you tax them and take monies away from them like that, when they're paying pretty hefty taxes as it is, they hire less, they do less, they quit their businesses, some move offshore, some have move their businesses to other countries, and some just plain give up. We can't let that happen. We've got to have a fair tax situation. We've got to have Democrats and Republicans work on it together. We've got to quit quit playing this card that basically pits one group of people against another. All I can say is this. I'm concerned. I'm pointing out difficulties in our tax code. I'm pointing out difficulties in some of the arguments the President is making. And I have to say that anybody who reads my remarks fairly will know that these points I'm making are real points. These charts really are important. And as you can see, taxpayers under $200,000 will be bereft without these benefits unless we can revamp the whole tax code in a way that you don't have to have tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are certainly not spending. And these ones we're talking about right here and now. So if you compare the total federal tax burden, those earning over $200,000 pay 64%, those under $200,000 pay 36%. All of that's important for us to understand. And, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President.